Thank you, everybody. It's great to be with you tonight. And happy birthday. I'll add my voice to those that we just saw. You know, there are lots of people who here tonight who have contributed so much to DU, who have really brought us along the path that we've come along over all of these 150 years. And to begin with, I'd like us to recognize a group of people who have meant so much to the university over the past years, and certainly who have meant so much to me over the time that I've been Chancellor. We have a number of members of our Board of Trustees who are present with us tonight. Board members, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you, thank you. There are a couple of other people here tonight who are very special, actually to all of us, but very special to me in particular. There are two men here from whom I have learned an enormous amount, and to whom I would venture virtually everyone in this room, owes an enormous debt of gratitude. Two Chancellors Emeriti are with us this evening. May I ask Chancellor Emeritus Dwight Smith and Chancellor Emeritus Dan Ritchie to stand, please. Thanks so much. Two men who have made an enormous difference in all of our lives, and most particularly in mine, I must say. 150 years is a lot of history, and we're going to be talking about history quite a bit for the remainder of the evening. And so let me begin with that, if I may. So we were founded in 1864 in Colorado, and at a time when Colorado was not a state, not even a territory. So imagine, if you will, let's just all close our eyes and imagine, if we might, let's say 10 years before we were founded, the middle of the 1850s in Colorado. And it is a wonderful summer Colorado day, rolling hills, prairie, big cottonwoods along the streams that roll down into the Platte River. Red-winged blackbirds in those trees clacking away. One of those beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Colorado days. But it's not quite Colorado yet. We're not even a territory yet. There are hardly any people here yet. The land is occupied mostly by the Cheyenne and the Arapaho American Indian tribes. Handful of trappers and hunters along the way. People down on the south side of the state, traders largely on the Santa Fe Trail, people moving through the north part on the parts of the Oregon Trail, but not much here at all, at all. Right here, where we are standing now, in the middle of this huge metropolitan city of Denver, nothing at all, just open prairie. In 1858, a gold strike, and everything changed. A steady stream of people coming here from the east to try to find their fortune in the Colorado Rockies, just as they had done in California 9 years earlier. And more of them every day coming this way. And a small sort of ramshackle supply camp, nothing more than that, formed up at the confluence of the Platte River and Cherry Creek. And there really wasn't much to it in the latter days of the 1850s. You know, a few hundred people at the beginning, a few thousand people at most, maybe 3,000 people or so when we were founded as a university. But it was this place, you know, built of tents and log cabins and lean-tos and a couple of actual buildings here and there, filled largely with transients, people who had come here to try to find their fortune and stayed for a few months and either left having found it or having given up. Almost entirely men, very few women in those days. When the gold was found and the city was founded in 1858, the rather new Kansas Territory extended its western boundary for a time to try to grab all that gold up. And so the city acquired its name, Denver, after the person who happened to be the governor of Kansas at the time, James W. Denver. And it would have stayed that way for a long time. It was just this place that was here one day and gone the next. There were fires and floods that completely wiped the place out, and then it would come back because there was a lot of gold up in those mountains. It would have stayed that way for a long time had it not been for really good fortune. And the first part of that really good fortune was that Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States in 1860. Colorado became a territory in 1861, and shortly after that, he appointed his longtime friend and political supporter, John Evans, as a territorial governor of the rather new Colorado Territory. And Evans had known him in Illinois and had been one of the founders of the Republican Party in Illinois, and a doctor, and a land speculator, and made some money in railroads. And out he came to Colorado in 1862. And he was absolutely appalled by what he found here. Just this little sort of town of Denver City that was here one day and gone the next, and had no real substance to it, certainly had no education, certainly had no culture, rather little of what we would call civilization. And so he set out to change that. And for Evans, that meant largely two things, which were religion. He was a devout Methodist, and it meant education. And he knew what he was doing when it came to education, because he had already founded one other institution in Illinois, Northwestern University, very much our sister institution. And so Evans got together a group of his friends and supporters, names we know, people like William Byers and Jerome Chaffee and Moffett and William Loveland and Samuel Elbert, his son-in-law. And together, after 2 years, they established an institution they called the Colorado Seminary. It raised about $10,000 to build its first building in 1864, which was located down on the corner of what we know as 14th and Arapahoe right now, where the DCPA is in downtown Denver. On that corner was the first building of the University of Denver, AKA the Colorado Seminary. And we have great pictures of it, sort of three-story schoolhouse-looking place, short cupola with a bell on top, looks very much like a schoolhouse. Unquestionably one of the tallest structures in many, many, many miles at the time. But the town was the town in the early 1860s. It really hadn't changed much. It was totally dependent on what was happening up in the gold fields in the Rockies. And it's thought that between 1860 and 1870, the population of Denver City, as it was called, increased by maybe 10 people over that period of time, with huge swings up and down in between. It's remarkable to think that in that town, in that tiny little, sort of supply camp for all the miners up in the mountains, that was so fragile. It's amazing to think that our university was founded in that town in 1864. But it was a remarkable, remarkable thing that might not have happened had it not been for good fortune and good circumstance. And I think we all know that the ensuing 150 years have been times of, lots of highs and lots of lows, lots of booms and lots of busts. The town nearly went out of business altogether in the early 1870s, but came back when there were a series of other gold strikes later on in those years. Colorado became a state in 1876 at a time when the general election, the presidential election, was really driving it, one of the closest presidential elections in our history. In 1880, Denver had grown to about 30,000 people. 30,000 people. We built a new building in the same place down at 14th and Arapahoe, hired our first chancellor. And later on in those days, we had another bit of great good fortune when Rufus Potato Clark, visited a revival at one point in God Religion, and was so thankful that he donated an enormous piece of land in what was called South Denver then, called University Park now, to the University of Denver. And out we moved from downtown to where we are located now. But that was followed by the silver panic in the 1890s, when the economy of Colorado just about went completely bust. And by the time Henry Buchtel arrived in 1900, the University Board of Trustees was busily negotiating to sell University Hall to a group of investors who were going to turn it into a glue factory in an effort to cover our debts at the time. Shortly thereafter, the Iliff School of Theology, which was the Department of Theology at DU, and had been fueled by an endowment from the cattle baron John Wesley Iliff, decided to secede from the university for fear that the university was going to collapse around them and take Iliff down with it. And so Iliff has been a separate institution since the early 1900s. But Buchtel persevered on, and he started wearing his red vest as a sign of optimism that things would certainly and surely get better. As well they did. By the time Buchtel was finished as chancellor in 1920, there were 2,000 students at DU. We had an entirely new campus on the University Park location that we love so well now, and a lot of it is still there. We built Hilltop Stadium shortly thereafter in 1926. An amazing thing that I recall Hilltop Stadium. I remember it from growing up here. But that was followed shortly by the Great Depression, which was followed by the war and then the GI Bill. And by the late 1940s, 1950, there were 10,000 students at DU. And we recruited Chester Alter to be our chancellor. And amazing things began to happen at DU with new buildings and new programs, and shortly after that, an enormous grant from the Ford Foundation. We were really on a roll. But then we all remember the 1980s, the mid-1980s, when disaster struck, and DU very, very nearly did not survive. Were it not for the strength of the faculty and staff, were it not for the strength of Chancellor Dwight Smith, who resurrected it like a phoenix coming out of the ashes. And shortly thereafter, Dan Ritchie became the Chancellor of the University of Denver, and the great DU that we know today began to blossom. The great DU that we know today. And so it's been a lot of years. And I tell our students that it's important to know, it's important to remember that for as long as there's been any sort of Denver in this place, any sort of Denver, from that tiny little supply camp to this metropolis of 3 million people, that DU has always been here through all of it, through the ups, through the downs, through the booms and busts. And over that period of time, if you've lived here long enough, you know that the city has acquired a particular character. And because the university has been here as long as the city itself, that the university has acquired that character itself. There is a certain energy. There is a certain open-mindedness. There is a certain entrepreneurial spirit. There is a certain creativity that goes here with the culture of the city, that is embedded in the culture of the University of Denver. A kind of creativity and energy and courage. After all of those highs and lows, there is a certain amount of steel in our backbone that we've simply developed as a community over 150 years. And I know that the years ahead are going to have their own challenges. And there are going to be a lot more highs and lows and booms and busts, and the city will continue to grow. But I must tell you that I can't think of any institution in this country that is better prepared to face the years ahead than is the University of Denver. If you think about it, if you think about what is required for success in the course of the next decade or two, when there are so many pressures on our culture in general, but most particularly on higher education that we read about every day, what is required is open-mindedness, creativity, energy, optimism. What is required is a little steel in an institutional backbone. And that is precisely the set of characteristics that we have acquired in this place over all of those 150 years so far. And so I look at the future with a sense of great, great optimism. I look at the future knowing the strength and resilience of DU after all of those years and all of that building for 150 years. And I absolutely am certain that that future out there belongs to us. Happy birthday, DU. Happy birthday.